Maybe we're live. Maybe we're live. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Medieval Storytime. Wow, my stupid mopping vacuum robot Jeeves is trying to talk back to me. Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Medieval Storytime with the creative Contessa. I am the Contessa, and I have some fun texts prepared for you today. We are going to be delving into the world of the Lay of Marie de France, 12th century fantasy stories of love and adventure and heartbreak and redemption. And then we're going to switch to, well, historical, a historical fantasy wedding in some ways. We're going to switch to a chronicle by Olivier de la Marche, recounting the splendid affair that was the wedding of Margaret of York to Charles, sometimes called the Bold, more likely should be called the Rash. And we'll be delving into the details of her wedding feast from the main part of their wedding celebration from like July 3rd to July 14th in 1486 in Bruges. So we've got some exciting texts today, and if we get through those and we have more time, then I have a couple of other fun little things prepared, including a passage from a diary from a late 14th, early 15th century Florentine peasant businessman that discusses his travels through Europe, so we can get an idea of just how often middle-class people, at the very least, traveled around Europe and what traveling was like for them. So, of course, as always, I'm going to start off with my typical getting dressed. Yeah, good morning, everyone. Audio is good. Splendid. Dr. Howat Ware, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. How is everyone's weekend going? I am once again attiring myself in the Florentine fashions. Sorry, everyone. I should have seen that was going to happen. Yeah. It is very cold here in Korea. So when I go outside, it's nice to be wearing this somewhat heavy gown because it definitely stops the wind. Well, it's very cold. It's cold for Daegu, South Korea anyway. I understand that actually and I know that it is much, much colder up further north. So I'm not necessarily complaining about it being cold, but. So for those of you who are wondering, this is a gamora. This is the foundational gown worn by women in Florence and actually most of northern Italy, or all of northern Italy in the 15th century. It's spelt 5 different ways at least across the Italies, and it is the gown that ladies of all socioeconomic statures wore when they were at home. And then when they went out of doors, if they were ladies, capital L, and not just servants, they would wear a layer over top of this or 2. However, I am only going to put this on because I've invited you into my home for a lovely intimate reading, so I don't need to put on a top layer. More specifically, the top layers that I have all have trains, and the vacation apartment where we are is way too small for dresses with trains. One thing I've learned wearing medieval clothes on a regular basis in all sorts of spaces is that your clothing also has to be suitable for the space that you inhabit. And beautiful, gorgeous, luxurious gowns with long trains are not suited for small spaces. Literally, the train gets wrapped up around your feet because it has nowhere to trail, as it were. I'm just going to go ahead and lace up. I have been doing some very interesting reading lately myself, not necessarily just in preparation for today's medieval story time. I have, of course, been delving more deeply into the topic of medieval hygiene as I consistently encounter people who quadruple down on the idea that medieval people were, as a general rule, filthy. They never washed because there were no baths. There was no way to shower, so how could you possibly be clean? So I have been looking specifically into not just visual evidence, which of course can be made up because medieval artists were, if nothing, creative and good at fantasy art. So I have been looking into health manuals, particularly the most recent one into which I've been looking is the Regimen Sanitatis, or Regimen Sanitatis, depending on your choice of medieval Latin pronunciation rules. And the Regimen Sanitatis was a manual of health composed by the medical school in Salerno in the 13th century, but they think it's based on a much earlier set of texts from, they think, maybe even the 11th century. And this text was actually composed by the College of Physicians for the King of England. It says that in the actual text. And it goes into a great deal of depth on a wide array of health relevant topics, including exercise, including how to perform phlebotomy. There's a very long description of how to properly perform phlebotomy on a person and the size of the hole you need to make to ensure that the blood and the evil humors run freely. A little disturbing if you think about what phlebotomy is. The idea of poking a particularly larger hole into your body so that you can bleed more freely, it's fascinating how that ever was considered a reasonable way to address a lack of good health. In any case, one of the details contained within this Regimen Sanitatis is a number of passages, a number of places where it mentions washing and bathing. It mentions it. I read through the whole thing, and just off the top of my head, I saw at least 5 very specific mentions of the need to wash and to bathe. It starts off by saying, for instance, that when you rise in the morning, you should wash your hands and face, you should comb your hair, you should brush your teeth, right? So that's 3 kinds of washing that happen there, right? That's, well, hands and face, and you should brush your teeth. So it then goes on to say when you perform a phlebotomy, you should make certain that washing happens. And the implication is that you should make sure that washing happens before, after the procedure and during the aftercare for the procedure, because the same passage also mentions bandages is something that's very important, right? It talks about several times, it talks about washing your hands before and after eating. So this idea that doctors didn't wash their hands before procedures, not backed up by this text that specifies that doctors should indeed wash their hands before and after procedures, and that, no one washed their hands before or after a meal. Also not true. And this is just one text of many that I've read that specify washing your hands before, sometimes during and after a meal. So yeah, I've been falling down that rabbit hole. So I have more direct and primary source references in my arsenal to counter-argue those nonsensical statements of everyone in the Middle Ages was dirty, only the wealthy could afford to bathe, blah, blah, blah. Where did it go? I also found a very interesting text, not a text, well, it is a text, but it was an article written by a German archaeologist who has excavated medieval German bathhouses. This is how we know that people bathe, because these were public bathhouses, and almost every German town or village had one. And he has excavated multiple of them, and his article actually provided a description of the process of going to these bathhouses. What exactly would your experience be like? And it reads almost exactly like going to a bathhouse here in Korea or going to a Turkish bathhouse. The similarities are uncanny. So this concept of people didn't bathe because they couldn't have bathtubs at home. Okay, first off, you don't need to have a bathtub to clean your body. All you need is a bowl and a rag. But also, public bathhouses everywhere, proven by archaeology. This archaeologist actually made a good point. He noted that the idea of these bathhouses only being hotbeds of prostitution and sexual adventures is not actually borne out by the records. Somewhere, but according to him, according to the records that have been kept, most of them were not. Although he said, as he said, and I've mentioned this also, authors at the time tended to sensationalize everything because it meant that their works got read. The idea of clickbait is not new. It's just now we have clickbait instead of just sort of reading bait, right? So that was very interesting. So I have been just sort of falling down this rabbit hole. I don't think I've hit the bottom of the medieval cleanliness rabbit hole. I expect that the more I dig, the more I scratch at the topic, the more I'm going to find primary source evidence of just how common it was for people to keep clean in a variety of ways. Okay, let me just check the chat. So for those who are new to my Medieval story time. The format is going to be that I will read a passage and we'll read the whole passage. And then we will, from there, go back through the passage and discuss certain things together because there's a lot of symbolism often in these medieval texts. There's allusions, there's references, and there's some, especially on the ones that are historical chronicles actually from the era, there's little details that we can extract to utilize in our medieval history lives. Yeah. Laurie, welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening. Righty ho. Just put on some rings to finish up the thing. This is one of Armor and Casting's rings. If you're interested in learning more about medieval jewelry and medieval rings in particular, I did a whole video recently on medieval rings, wearable wealth, the fascinating lives of medieval rings. If you're interested in checking that out, it's here on this YouTube channel. It's not long, it's 20 minutes long, and lots of really good research went into that. So yeah. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive in. So today we have, first off, we're going to start with a reading of the Lay of Marie de France. So a lay is a kind of fantasy story. Supposedly, it's specifically a Breton fantasy story, so from Bretagne, from Brittany. And Marie de France is actually the daughter of Eleanor of Aquitaine. And she composed a whole book of lay. And she tells us right out that these are Breton stories and that she is just conveying them to us. But of course, as with Boccaccio and Il Decamerone, as with Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, as with Shakespeare, all of these stories might have been extant folktales and were, no doubt. But the authors who then write them down and convey them to us add their own voices, their own additions, their own depth, their own symbolism and meaning and allusion to them. And Marie de France is no different, right? This isn't just a summary of a story. These are in essence short stories, proper short stories with character development and emotions, the whole 9 yards. So we read a couple of months ago, we read together Bisclavret, which was the tale of the werewolf, the knight who is a werewolf, Bisclavret, so fun fantasy there. So now we're going to be reading the tale of Guigemar. And it's called that, even though, there are other people in it. But interestingly, the only named character is Gijmar. And I'm actually not certain if his name is pronounced Gijmar or Guigemar or Gijmar, because this is 12th century French. And I'm not as familiar with those spelling conventions. So I guess I shall be pronouncing his name Gijmar, especially if it's Breton. I don't speak Breton at all, not even the least little bit. Right, okay, so the format is going to be, as always, I will read through the entire text and then we will go back through it and we will discuss various passages together. We'll delve into the allusion and the significance. This is actually the first story in her collection. This is actually the first story in her collection. And so there's probably a reason she chose for this one to be the first story in her collection. And I'll explain that in more detail later on. So one of the interesting things about Marie's narrative style is that she sometimes interjects her own voice. So as that crops up, I will highlight that when we go back through. The tale of Gijmar. Whoever deals with good material feels pain if it's treated improperly. Listen, my lords, to the words of Marie, who does not forget her responsibilities when her turn comes. People should praise anyone who wins admiring comments for herself. But anywhere there is a man or a woman of great worth, people who envy their good fortune often say evil things about them. They want to ruin their reputations. Thus, they act like vicious, cowardly dogs who bite people treacherously. I don't propose to give up because of that. If spiteful critics or slanderers wish to turn my accomplishments against me, they have a right to their evil talk. The tales and I know they're true, from which the Bretons made their lay, I'll now recount for you briefly. And at the very beginning of this enterprise, just the way it was written down, I'll relate an adventure that took place in Brittany in the old days. At the time, Hoel ruled Brittany, sometimes peacefully, sometimes at war. The king had a vassal who was Lord of Léonie. His name was Oridial, and he was on very intimate terms with his lord. A worthy and valiant knight, he had, by his wife, 2 children, a son and a beautiful daughter. The girl's name was Noguin. They called the boy Gijmar. There wasn't a more handsome youngster in the kingdom. His mother had a wonderful love for him, and his father a great devotion. When he could bring himself to part with the boy, his father sent him to serve the king. The boy was intelligent and brave, and made himself loved by all. When his time of probation was at an end, and he was mature in body and mind, the king dubbed him knight, giving him luxurious armor, which was exactly what he desired. Gijmar left the court, but not dispensing many rich gifts. Gijmar left the court, but not before dispensing many rich gifts. He journeyed to Flanders to seek his fame. There was always a war or a battle raging there. Neither in Lorraine nor in Burgundy, in Anjou nor in Gascony could one find in those days Guigemar's equal as a fine knight. But in forming him, nature had so badly erred that he never gave any thought to love. There wasn't a lady or a maid on earth, no matter how noble or how beautiful, who wouldn't have willingly granted him her love, had he asked her for it. Many maids asked him, but he wasn't interested in such things. No one could answer in him the slightest desire to love. Therefore, both friends and strangers gave him up for lost. At the height of his fame, this baron, Gijmar, returned to his own land to visit his father and his lord, his good mother and his sister, all of whom were most eager to see him. Gijmar stayed with them, I believe, an entire month. Then he was seized by the desire to hunt. That night, he summoned his companions in arms, his huntsmen, and his beaters. Next morning, he set out for the woods to indulge in the sport that gave him much pleasure. They gathered in pursuit of a great stag. The dogs were unleashed. The hunters ran ahead while the young man lingered behind. A squire carried his bow, his hunting knife, and his quiver. He wanted to fire some arrows if he had the opportunity before he left that spot. In the thickest part of a great bush, Gijmar saw a hind and a fawn, a completely white beast with deer's antlers on her head. Spurred by the barking of the dogs, she sprang into the open. Gijmar took his bow and shot at her, striking her in the breastbone. She fell at once, but the arrow rebounded, gave Gijmar such a wound, it went through his thigh right into the horse's flank, that he had to dismount. He collapsed on the thick grass beside the hind he'd struck. The hind, wounded as she was, suffered pain and groaned. Then she spoke in this fashion. "Alas, I'm dying, and you, vassal, who wounded me, this be your destiny. May you never get medicine for your wound. Neither herb nor root, neither physician nor potion will cure you of that wound in your thigh, until a woman heals you. One who will suffer out of love for you, pain and grief, such as no woman has ever suffered before. And out of love for her, you'll suffer as much. The affair will be a marvel to lovers past and present, and to all those yet to come. Now, go away, leave me in peace." Gijmar was badly wounded. What he had heard dismayed him. He began to consider carefully what land he might set out for to have his wound healed. He didn't want to remain there and die. He knew, he reminded himself, that he'd never seen a woman to whom he wanted to offer his love. No one could cure his pain. He called his squire to him. "Friend," he said, "go quickly. Bring my companions back here. I wish to talk with them." The squire rode off, and Gijmar remained, but he complained bitterly to himself. Making his shirt into a bandage, he bound his wound tightly. Then he mounted his horse and left that spot. He was anxious to get far away. He didn't want any of his men to come along who might interfere or try to detain him. Through the woods, he followed a grassy path, which led him out into open country. There, at the edge of the plain, he saw a cliff and a steep bank overlooking a body of water below a bay that formed a harbor. There was a solitary ship in the waters. Gijmar saw its sail. It was fit and ready to go. It was caulked outside and in. No one could discover a seam in its hull. Every deck rail and peg was solid ebony. No gold under the sun could be worth more. The sail was pure silk. It would look beautiful when unfurled. The knight was troubled. He had never heard it said anywhere in that region that ships could land there. He went down to the harbor and, in great pain, boarded the ship. He expected to discover men inside guarding the vessel, but he saw no one at all. Amidships he found a bed whose posts and frame were wrought in the fashion of Solomon, of cypress and ivory with lines in inlaid gold. The quilt on the bed was made of silken cloth woven with gold. I don't know how to estimate the value of the other bedclothes, but I'll tell you this much about the pillow. Whoever rested his head on it would never have white hair. The sable bedspread was lined with Alexandrian silk. 2 candelabra of fine gold, the lesser of the 2 worth a fortune, were placed at the head of the cabin, lighted tapers placed in them. Gijmar, astonished by all this, reclined on the bed and rested. His wound hurt. Then he rose and tried to leave the ship, but he couldn't return to land. The vessel was already on the high seas, carrying him swiftly with it. A good, gentle wind was blowing, so turning back now was absolutely out of the question. Gijmar was very upset. He didn't know what to do. It's no wonder he was frightened, especially as his wound was paining him a great deal. Still, he had to see the adventure through. He prayed to God to watch over him, to use his power to bring him back to land and to protect him from death. He lay down on the bed and fell asleep. That day, he'd survived the worst. Before sundown, he would arrive at the place where he'd be cured, near an ancient city, the capital of its realm. The lord who ruled over that city was a very aged man who had a wife, a woman of high lineage, noble, courteous, beautiful, intelligent. The man was extremely jealous, which accorded with his nature. All old folk are jealous. Every one of them hates the thought of being cuckolded. Such is the perversity of age. That's Marie interjecting. The watch he kept over her was no joke. The grove beneath the tower was enclosed all around with walls of green marble, very high and thick. There was only one entrance, and it was guarded night and day. On the other side, the sea enclosed it. No one could enter, no one could leave, except by means of a boat. Foreshadowing. Inside the castle walls, the lord had built a chamber, none more beautiful anywhere, to keep his wife under guard. At its entrance was a chapel. The room was painted with images all around. Venus, the goddess of love, was skillfully depicted in the painting. Her nature and her traits were illustrated, whereby men might learn how to behave in love and to serve love loyally. Ovid's book, the one in which he instructs lovers how to control their love, was being thrown by Venus into a fire, and she was excommunicating all those who ever perused this terrible book or followed its awful teachings. That's where the wife was locked up. Her husband had given her a young lady to serve her, one who was noble and well-educated. She was his niece, the daughter of his sister. There was great affection between these 2 women. She stayed with her mistress when he went off, remaining with her until he returned. No one else came there. man or woman, nor could the wife leave the walls of the enclosure. An old priest, hoary with age, kept the gate key. He'd lost his nether member, or he wouldn't have been trusted. He said mass for her and served her food. That same day, as soon as she rose from a nap, the wife went into the grove. She had slept after dinner, and now she set out to amuse herself, taking her maid with her. Looking out to sea, they saw the ship on the rising tide come sailing into the harbor. They could see nothing guiding it. The lady started to flee. It's not surprising if she was afraid. Her face grew red from fear. But the girl, who was wise and more courageous, comforted and reassured her, and they went toward the water as fast as they could. The damsel removed her cloak and boarded the beautiful ship. She found no living thing except the sleeping knight. She saw how pale he was and thought him dead. She stopped and gazed at him. Then she went back quickly and called her mistress, told her that she'd found and lamented the dead man she'd seen. The lady answered, "Let's go see him. If he's dead, we'll bury him. The priest will help us. If I find that he's alive, he'll tell us all about this." Without tarrying any longer, they returned together, the lady first, then the damsel. When the lady entered the ship, she stopped in front of the bed. She examined the knight, lamenting his beauty and fine body. She was so full of sorrow on his account and said it was a shame that he died so young. She put her hand on his breast and felt that it was warm. And his heart was healthy, in fact, beating beneath his ribs. The knight, who was merely asleep, now woke up and saw her. He was delighted and greeted her. He realized he had come to land. The lady, upset and weeping, answered him politely and asked him how he got there, what country he came from, if he'd been exiled because of war. "My lady," he said, "not at all. But if you'd like me to tell you the truth, I'll do so. I will hide nothing from you. I come from Brittany. Today I went out hunting in the woods and shot a white hind. The arrow rebounded, giving me such a wound in the thigh that I'd given up hope of ever being cured. The hind spoke to me, cursed me, swore that I'd never be healed except by a woman. I don't know where she might be found. When I heard my destiny, I quickly left the woods. I found this boat in the harbor, and I made a big mistake." Wow, introspection. That's amazing. "I went on board. The boat raced off to sea with me in it. I don't know where I've arrived or what this city's called. Beautiful lady, I beg you, for the sake of God, please advise me. I don't know where to go, and I can't even steer this ship." She answered him, "My dear lord, I shall be happy to advise you. This is my husband's city, and so is the region around it. He is a rich man of high lineage, but extremely old. He's also terribly jealous. On my word of honor, he has locked me up in this stronghold. There's only one entrance, and an old priest guards the gate. May God let him burn in hell. I'm shut in here night and day. I'd never dare to leave except at his command when my lord asks for me. Here I have my room and my chapel, and this damsel lives with me. If it pleases you to stay here until you're better able to travel, we'll be happy to put you up. We'll serve you willingly." When he hears this, Gijmar thanks the lady warmly and says he'll stay with her. He rose from the bed. With some difficulty, they supported him, and the lady brought him to her chamber. The young man lay down on the lady's bed behind a drape that was hung across her room like a curtain. They brought him water in a golden basin, washed his thigh, washed his thigh, and with a fine white silken cloth, they wiped the blood from his wound. Then they bound it tightly. They treated him very kindly. When their evening meal came, the girl left enough of hers for the knight to have some. He ate and drank well. But now love struck him to the quick. Great strife was in his heart because the lady had wounded him so badly that he forgot his homeland. His other wound no longer bothered him, but he sighed with a new anguish. He begged the damsel, who was assigned to take care of him, to let him sleep. She left him and went away, since he had requested it, returning to her mistress, who was also feeling somewhat scorched by the same fire Gijmar felt, igniting and consuming his heart. The knight was alone now, preoccupied and in distress. He didn't yet know what was wrong, but this much he could tell. If the lady did not cure him, he was sure to die. Alas, he said, what shall I do? I'll go to her and tell her that she should have mercy and pity on a poor, disconsolate wretch like me. If she refuses my plea, shows herself so proud and scornful, then I shall have to die of grief, languishing forever in this pain. He sighed, but a little later formed a new resolution. He said to himself he'd have to keep suffering. You have to endure what you can't change, he said to himself. He lay awake all night, sighing and in distress. He turned over in his mind her words and appearance, the bright eyes, the fair mouth, whose sweetness had touched his heart. Under his breath, he cried for mercy. He almost called her his beloved. If only he knew what she was feeling, how love was torturing her. I think he would have been very happy to know. That little bit of consolation would have diminished the pain that drained him of his color. If he was suffering from love of her, she had nothing to gloat about either. Next morning, before dawn, the lady arose. She'd been awake all night. That was her complaint. It was the fault of love pressing her hard. The damsel, who was with her, noticed from the appearance of her lady that she was in love with the knight who was staying in her chamber until he was healed. But her mistress didn't know whether or not he returned this love. The lady went off to church, and the girl went off to the knight. She sat down by the bed. He spoke to her, saying, "My dear friend, where has my lady gone? Why did she rise so early?" He paused and sighed. The girl spoke frankly. "My lord," she said, "you're in love. Take care not to hide it too well. The love you offer may, in fact, be well received. Anyone whom my lady chooses to love certainly ought to think well of her. This love would be suitable if both of you were constant. You're handsome and she's beautiful." Gijmar answered the damsel, "I am so in love with her that if I don't get relief soon, I shall be in a very bad way. Advise me, chère amie, what should I do about my passion?" The girl very sweetly comforted the knight, promised to help him in every way she could. She was good-hearted and well-educated. When the lady had heard mass, she returned. She was anything but neglectful. She wanted to know whether the man whom she couldn't help loving was awake or asleep. The girl called her and brought her to the knight. Now she'll have all the time she needs to tell him what she's feeling, for better or for worse. He greeted her and she him. They were both very scared now. He didn't dare ask anything from her, for he was a foreigner, and was afraid if he told her what he felt, she'd hate him for it, send him away. But he who hides his sickness can hardly be brought back to health. Love is a wound in the body, and yet nothing appears on the outside. It's a sickness that lasts a long time because it comes from nature. Many people treat it lightly, like those false courtiers who have affairs everywhere they go, then boast about their conquests. That's not love, but folly, evil, and lechery. If you can find a loyal love, you should love and serve it faithfully, be at its command. Gijmar was deeply in love. He must either go help quickly or live in misery. So, love inspires bravery in him. He reveals his desires to the lady. "Lady," he said, "I am dying because of you. My heart is full of anguish. If you won't cure me, I shall perish sooner or later. I beg you to love me. Fair one, do not deny me." When she had heard him out, she gave a fitting answer. She laughed and said, "My love, I'd be ill-advised to act too quickly in granting your prayer. I'm not accustomed to such a request." "My lady," he replied, "for God's sake have mercy. Don't be annoyed if I speak like this to you. It's appropriate for an inconstant woman to make someone plead with her for a long time to enhance her worth. That way he won't think she's used to such sport. But a woman of good character, sensible as well as virtuous, if she finds a man to her liking, oughtn't to treat him too disdainfully. Rather, she should love him and enjoy him. This way, before anyone knows or hears of it, they'll have done a lot that's to their advantage. Now, dear lady, let's end this discussion. The lady realized he was telling the truth and immediately granted him her love. Then he kissed her. From now on, Gijmar is at ease. They lie down together and converse, kissing and embracing often. I hope they also enjoy whatever else others do on such occasions. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. It appears to me that Gijmar stayed with her a year and a half. Their life was full of pleasure. But Fortuna, who never forgets her duty, turns her wheel suddenly, raising one person up while casting another down. And so it happened with the lovers, because suddenly they were discovered. One summer morning, the lady was lying beside her young lover. She kissed his mouth and eyes and said to him, "Dear, sweet love, my heart tells me I'm going to lose you. We're going to be found out. If you die, I want to die too. But if you can escape, you'll go find another love while I stay here in misery." "Lady," he said, "say no such thing. I would never have any joy or peace if I turned to another woman. You needn't be afraid of that. Beloved, I need your promise. Give me your shirt. I shall make a knot in the tail. You have my leave to love the woman, whoever she may be, who will be able to undo it." He gave her the shirt and his promise. She made the knot in such a way that no woman could untie it except with scissors or a knife. She gave him back the shirt, and he took it on condition that she should make a similar pledge to him by means of a belt that she would wear next to her bare flesh tightened about her flanks. Whoever could open the buckle without breaking it or severing it from the belt would be the one he would urge her to love. He kissed her and left it at that. That day they were discovered, spied upon and found out by an evil, cunning chamberlain sent by the husband. He had wanted to speak with the lady and couldn't get into her chamber. He looked in a window and saw the lovers, and immediately went and told his lord. When he heard about it, the lord was sorrier than he'd ever been before. He called for 3 of his henchmen and straightway went to his wife's chamber. He had the door broken down. Inside, he found the knight. He was so furious that he gave orders to kill the stranger. Gijmar got up and, not at all afraid, grabbed a wooden rod on which clothes were usually hung and waited for his assailants. Action time. Gijmar will make some of them suffer for this. Before they get close to him, he'll have maimed them all. The lord stared at him for a long time and finally asked him who he was, where he came from, how he'd gotten in there. Gijmar told him how he'd come there and how the lady had received him. He told him all about the adventure of the wounded hind, about the wound and the ship. Now he is entirely in the other's power. The lord replied that he didn't believe him, but if it really was the way he had told it, and if he could find the ship, he'd send Gijmar back out to sea. If he survived, that would be a shame. He'd be happier if Gijmar drowned. When he had made this pledge, they went together to the harbor and found the ship. They put Gijmar on it. It will take him back to his own land. The ship got underway without waiting. The knight sighed and cried, often lamenting his lady and praying to Almighty God to grant him a quick death, and to never let him come to port if he couldn't regain his mistress, whom he desired more than his own life. He persisted in his grief until the ship came to the port where he'd first found it. He was now very near his native land. He left the ship as quickly as he could. A boy whom Gijmar had raised came by, following a knight and leading a war horse. Gijmar recognized him and called to him. The squire looked at him, recognized him, dismounted, and presented the charger to his lord. Gijmar went off with him. All his friends rejoiced that they had found him again. He was highly honored in his land, but through it all, he was sad and distracted. His friends wanted him to take a wife, but he refused all of them. He will never engage with another woman again, not for love or money, unless she can untie his knotted shirt without tearing it. The news traveled throughout Brittany. all the women and damsels came to try their luck, but none could untie the knot. Now, I want to tell you about the lady whom Gijmar loved so dearly. On the advice of one of his barons, her husband had her imprisoned in a dark marble tower. There, she passed bad days, worse nights. No one in the world could describe the pain, the suffering, the anguish, and the grief that she endured in that tower. She remained there for 2 years and more, I believe, without ever having a moment of pleasure. Often she mourned for her lover. Gijmar, my lord, why did I ever lay eyes on you? I'd rather die quickly than suffer this lingering torture. My lord, if I could escape, I'd go to where you put out to sea and drown myself. Then she got up. In astonishment, she went to the door, and she found it unlocked. By good fortune, she got outside. No one barred her way. She came to the harbor and found the boat. It was tied to the rock where she had intended to drown herself. When she saw it there, she went aboard. She could think of only one thing, that this was where her lover had perished. Suddenly, she couldn't stand up. If she could have gotten back up on deck, she would have thrown herself overboard, so great was her suffering. The boat set out, taking her with it. It came to a port in Brittany, beneath a strong, well-built castle. The lord of the castle was named Margaret. He was fighting a war with a neighbor, as one often did back then, and had risen early that morning because he wanted to dispatch his troops to attack his enemy. Standing at a window, he saw the ship arrive. He went downstairs and called his chamberlain. Quickly, they went up to the ship, climbed up its ladder, and inside they found the lady who had a fairy-like beauty. He took her by the cloak and brought her with him to his castle. He was delighted with his discovery, for she was incredibly beautiful. Whoever had put her on the boat, he could tell she came from a high lineage. He felt for her a love as great as he'd ever felt for a woman. Love. Yes, we know what love is here. Margaret had a young sister, a beautiful maiden in his care. He commended the lady to her attention, so she was waited on and made much of. The damsel dressed her richly, but she remained constantly sad and preoccupied. The Lord often came to speak with her, since he wanted to love her with all his heart. He pleaded for her love. She didn't want it. Instead, she showed him her belt. She would never love any man except the one who could open the belt without breaking it. When he heard that, Margaret replied angrily, "There's another one like you in this land, a very worthy knight, who avoids in a similar manner taking a wife by means of a shirt, the right side of which is knotted. It can't be untied except by using scissors or a knife. I think you must have made that knot." When the lady heard this, she sighed and almost fainted. He took her in his arms, cut the laces of her tunic, and tried to open the belt, but he didn't succeed. There wasn't a knight in the region whom he didn't summon to try his luck. Things went on like this for quite a while, up to the time of a tournament that Margaret had proclaimed against the lord he was fighting. He sent for knights and enlisted them in his service, knowing very well that Gijmar would come. He asked him for a special favor, as his friend and companion, not to let him down in the hour of need, but to come help him. So, Gijmar set out, richly supplied, leading more than 100 knights. Margaret entertained him as an honored guest in his stronghold. He then sent 2 knights to his sister and commanded her to prepare herself and come to him, bringing with her the lady he loved so much. The damsel obeyed his order. Lavishly outfitted, they came hand in hand into the great hall. The lady was pale and upset. She heard Gijmar's name and couldn't stand up. If the damsel hadn't supported her, she'd have fallen to the ground. Gijmar arose when the women entered. He looked at the lady and noticed her appearance and behavior. Involuntarily, he shrank back a bit. In this, he said, "My dear love, my hope, my heart, and my life, is this my beautiful lady who loved me? Where did she come from? Who brought her here? Now, that was a foolish thought. I know it can't be she. Women often look alike." I grew all excited for no reason, but because she looks like the one for whom my heart aches and sighs, I'll gladly speak to her. Men. So nights are just so deep. Oh my goodness. Then the knight came forward. He kissed her and sat down beside her. He didn't say another word except that he asked her to sit down with him. Marmaduke looked at them closely, upset by the sight of them together. He called Gijmar cheerfully. "My lord," he said, "please let this young lady try to untie your shirt. See if she can manage to do it." Gijmar answered, "Certainly." He summoned a chamberlain who was in charge of the shirt and commanded him to bring it. Rather like a relic. It was given to the lady, but she couldn't untie it at all. The lady knew the knot very well, but her heart was greatly agitated, for she would love to try to untie it if she dared and could. Marmaduke saw this clearly. He was as sorry as he could be. "My lady," he said, "now you try to untie it if you can." When she heard his order, she took the shirt and easily untied the knot. Gijmar was thunderstruck. He knew her very well, and yet he couldn't bring himself to believe firmly it was she. So he spoke to her in this way. "Beloved, sweet creature, is that you? Tell me truly. Let me see your body, the belt I put on you." He put his hands on her hips and found the belt. "My beautiful one," he said, "what a lucky adventure that I found you like this. Who brought you here?" She told him about the grief, about the great pains, the monotony of the prison where she had been held captive, and everything that had happened to her, how she escaped, how she wished to drown but found the ship instead, and how she entered it and was brought to this port, and how the lord of the castle kept her in custody, guarding her in luxury, but constantly asking for her love. Now her joy has returned. "My love, take back your beloved." Gijmar got up. "My lords," he said, "listen to me. Here I have the mistress I thought I had lost forever. Now I ask and implore Marmaduke to give her back to me out of kindness. I will become his vassal, serve him for 2 or 3 years with 100 knights or more." Marmaduke answered. "Gijmar," he said, "my handsome friend, I'm not so harried or so afflicted by any war that you can bargain with me about this. I mean, I'm just in the middle of warring with a neighbor, but whatever. Apparently, I don't need any help. I found this woman and I propose to take care of her and defend her against you, to take care of her and defend her against you." When Gijmar heard that, he quickly commanded his men to mount. He galloped away, defying Marmaduke. It upset him to leave his beloved behind. Gijmar took with him every knight who had come to the town for the tournament. Each declared his loyalty for Gijmar. They'll accompany him wherever he goes. Whoever fails him now will be truly dishonored. That night, they came to the castle of Marmaduke's opponent. The lord of the castle put them up. He was joyful and delighted that Gijmar came over to his side, bringing help with him. Now he's sure to win the war as good as over. The next morning, they arose and equipped themselves at their lodgings. They departed from the village noisily. Gijmar came first, leading them. Arriving at Marmaduke's castle, they assaulted it, but it was very strong and they failed to take it. Gijmar besieged the town. He won't leave until it has fallen. His friends and other troops increased so greatly that he was able to starve everyone inside. He captured and destroyed the castle, killed its lord. Gijmar led away his mistress with great rejoicing. All his pain was now at an end. From this story that you have heard, the lay of Gijmar was composed, which is now recited to the harp. The music is a pleasure to hear. The end. This story is so fascinating on so many levels. The ending is just not what you usually expect at the end of a romance. They went and laid siege to the castle. They couldn't breach the walls of the castle, so they laid siege to the town. They starved everyone out. Everyone died. He gets the lady. The end. Okay. Right. So let me just check the comments here. I see there are not many, so I'm not certain if that's because the comments are being hidden from me for whatever reason. Okay, comments, questions about the story before we go back through and explore a little more detail, delve more deeply into some of the details, rather, because there are some very interesting nuances, nuggets of information about daily life. And there's also some very interesting symbolism. Yeah. For instance, did any of you notice that a hind is a female deer, by the way. Did any of you notice that the hind in this story has antlers, right? The hind is actually bisexual because hinds don't have antlers, right? But that's actually a very interesting bit of the fantasy here. Also, the hind speaks and curses Gijmar. So there's a lot going on with this hind that he encounters in the forest. The trope of the hunter encountering a magical or goddess-like hind and shooting it is a pretty old one, and it always has dire consequences, right? Okay, this is kind of inspiring. Back to sleep for me, though. Good night. Thank you for joining, John Darland. Hope don't forget to like and subscribe, everyone, if you're enjoying it. Yeah. So Susan asks, what happened to the husband? We don't know. Right. We don't know what happens to the lady's husband. Did you also notice that the lady never gets a name? Right. The younger sister, who makes no appearance in this story at all, Gijmar's younger sister, or his sister, are they twins? I forget if they were twins. They have 2 children. We don't know if they're twins. His sister is named Noguon, right? She's named. She gets a name. This king gets a name. Guigemar's father gets a name, right? But the lady never gets a name. So she, you could read that as the idea that she represents all ladies in an insufferable, loveless marriage to a controlling and extremely jealous old husband, right? That is a pretty common trope in these stories. So, you can view this love story, Gijmar, as a growth journey, right? So we have Gijmar at the beginning. He's basically an asexual young man, right? He's not interested in any of the activities and relationships that a post-pubescent human should be, hypothetically, right? Especially in this world. And it's actually only by going on this hunt that he actually gets interested in women. He's so handsome and so attractive. Remember this passage? He says, there wasn't a lady or maid on earth, no matter how noble or how beautiful, who wouldn't have willingly granted him her love. That's how attractive he is. Many maids asked him, but he wasn't interested in such things. No one could discover in him the slightest desire to love. So women are literally throwing themselves. And there's a little linguistic detail you should have here. There wasn't a lady or a maid. So maid being an unmarried young woman, presumably who is still chaste, shall we say, right? Or a lady, that being a married lady, right? A lady or a maid, a pre-marriage woman or a post-marriage woman who wouldn't have willingly granted him her love. And love here is very much is a double entendre, right? It is both the emotional and the physical act to which they are referring here. So yeah, so we've got this very, very handsome young man who isn't interested in love or in any kind of love, sexual or asexual, platonic, doesn't matter. He's not interested in love. And instead he decides he's going to go make his fame in Flanders, right? Where there was always a war, which is an interesting little tidbit into the political situation of the 12th century France, of 12th century Central Europe, right? There's so many references to wars in this short story the references are tossed off so casually as to not even be really noteworthy, just as a by the way. There's this war happening here, and there's this war happening here, and there's this guy sieging his neighbor, right? This is 12th century life, and this kind of constant warfare that was happening in Europe is also in part blamed for the Crusades. There's some theories that Pope Urban IV called the First Crusade, hoping that he would get all these violent knights out of Europe, send them somewhere else to be violent, and that maybe Europe could have a little bit of respite from all of this constant state of warfare. Right. So that's really referenced here, and it's acknowledged that apparently the First Crusade and the Second Crusade did not do that, at least. Because Marie is composing these sort of, I think, right before the Third Crusade. Apparently, there's still a lot of warfare happening is the point, right? So then he is seized by this desire to hunt, right? And he goes off on this hunt. And it's very interesting because they mention him having a bow, and a lot of people think that knights wouldn't dare have touched a bow, right? There's this, I think it's probably more a Victorian myth that knights viewed archery as a dishonorable pastime, right? And yet here in this hunt, he's mentioned as having a squire who's carrying his bow, his hunting knife, and his quiver. And he mentions specifically that he wants to shoot some arrows. And then he does, and he pays a big penalty for shooting the wrong kind of animal. So this is a cautionary tale, everyone. If you are a knight, if you're not even a knight, if you are out there in the forest and you see a white hind with a fawn, walk away. Just walk away. Don't mess with it. It's, you're asking for a world of supernatural trouble, right? So the arrow actually, it fatally strikes the hind, but then it rebounds and it ends up going through his leg into his horse's flank, which is pretty gruesome in and of itself. And that is the point at which the dying hind curses him. And so some people read this part of the passage as basically the painful way in which he awakens to the world of love, both physical and emotional. Because this bisexual beast, this hind that has a stag's antlers, of this encounter with this bisexual beast is his awakening, right? And that it is through this encounter that he's now going to find a woman who will actually bring him to his next level of maturity, that will actually help him grow fully into a mature adult. Right? Whereas right now he's basically a boy with weapons. So this ship that, just magically appears. I love how many of these knights in all of these stories, none of them seem to read these stories themselves. Like they never apply the lessons that we learn from these stories. For instance, if there is a ship, a mysterious ship that looks super luxurious and is fantastical beyond all common ships that you've ever seen, maybe you shouldn't just board and walk around it. Maybe you should walk away because nearly always something unexpected and out of your control is going to happen. Same thing with the richly decorated pavilion in the forest, or the random tower that you encounter in the forest. Don't climb it and go see what's in the bedchamber. God, man, learn from your own stories, right? It's like modern horror movies. People in horror movies don't realize they're in horror movies. Knights in medieval fantasy stories don't realize they're knights in medieval fantasy stories. Never look a gift ship in the mouth. Yep, never ever. You are so right, Susan. So, but there were some very interesting details about this ship, because it's presented as being, the way it's presented would have definitely told a 12th century reader or listener, 13th, 14th, 15th century reader or listener, that this was not just any ship. So here is what basically a description of a fantasy ship in the 12th century is. So I try to emphasize that stories like this are medieval fantasy stories. They are not just love stories. This is medieval fantasy, like real fantasy from the Middle Ages. So here, let's take a look at how the ship is described again, right? It says, it was caulked outside and in. No one could discover a seam in its hull. So that's pretty amazing. A seamless hull. Oh, wow. Every deck rail and peg was solid ebony. Do you know where ebony comes from? It does not come from Europe. Ebony is it's a tropical wood. It is extremely expensive and it has to be imported. So, this deck rail and the deck rails and the pegs that peg the boards into place are ebony, right? Solid ebony, no less. No gold under the sun could be worth more, acknowledging the expense of ebony in the 12th century. The sail was pure silk. I actually have never heard of a ship from the Middle Ages that actually had silken sails. If you've heard, let me know if you've actually read any inventories or expense accounts of real ships, not fantasy ships in Brittany, having silken sails, but I'm pretty certain to a 12th century reader, a silk sail would have been very remarkable. And again, an indication that this is not just your everyday, it is not your everyday ship, right? It's not made of fustian, it's not made of linen, it's not made of wool, it's made of silk. So the knight actually was troubled. This is the funny part. It says the knight was troubled. He had never heard it said anywhere in that region that ships could land in this harbor. So we've got this harbor. The knight thinks that this harbor is actually unnavigable. And still he goes down to check out the ship and goes on board. Like, if you know that the body of water is unnavigable and there's a magical fantasy ship on it, maybe walk away. Clearly he didn't want to walk away. Like, there was some part of him that knew that he needed this adventure, right? So he's got this bed, and this bed is described in a very interesting fashion. Amidships, he found a bed whose posts and frame were wrought in the fashion of Solomon, of cypress and ivory with designs inlaid in gold. So there's two possible, this could actually be a double entendre, or it could be one of the two meanings. So in the Middle Ages, Solomon work, a piece of furniture wrought in the style of Solomon, that was marquetry, that was inlay. So this means that it's this gorgeous inlay, and that's why they say it's wrought in the fashion of Solomon, of cypress and ivory with designs inlaid in gold. So it's this magnificent piece of inlaid furniture. In this era, inlaid furniture is not native to Northern Europe, right? If you have furniture that is made of marquetry, it's imported from somewhere in the Mediterranean. It's imported from Spain or North Africa, or it's imported from the Eastern Mediterranean. It is highly luxury. This could also be a reference to the legend. So apparently there's also this legend about a marvelous ship made by Solomon that actually intrudes into some stories about the Holy Grail. So this could be a reference to this being Solomon's magic ship, but I kind of think it's probably more that when they say it's wrought in the fashion of Solomon, it's that reference to that marquetry. And, cypress and ivory. Neither cypress nor ivory are native to Northern Europe. Neither, and designs inlaid in gold. So this is quite a bed, and I would love this bed. This would be a fantastic bed. And then we get some idea about luxury bedding in the 12th century, which I really loved this detail as well. The quilt on the bed was made of silken cloth woven with gold. So it's cloth of gold, which in the 12th century is an insanely luxury item, because cloth of gold in the 12th century isn't being woven in Europe, or not in main continental Europe. It's being imported mostly from the East. I think there are silk workshops at this point in Constantinople, but that's a major import to get from Constantinople up to Brittany. So super luxury item at this stage. I mean, it's kind of always a super luxury item because of the gold, but the manufacture alone being very far away elevates its luxury status and makes it even more rare as a kind of quilt that would have been available in Brittany in the 12th century. Marie says, I don't know how to estimate the value of the other bedclothes, but I'll tell you this much about the pillow. Whoever rested their head on it would never have white hair. So there's this kind of casual and one-off reference to this magical pillow that prevents you from aging, which is interesting. Now we get to the bedspread. The sable bedspread was lined with Alexandrian silk. So sable is a wonderful fur. It's a kind of weasel. And sable fur was one of the most desirable furs in most of the Middle Ages. It's a dense, sables have very dense fur. So it's velvety. It's so silky and velvety, and it's super thick. It's, cats don't have super thick fur. Bunnies don't have super thick fur compared to sables. And it's lined with Alexandrian silk. So again, this reference to the exotic East and to the imported nature of these materials. So you've got basically, and you actually see these kind of bedspreads depicted in 15th century art for certain. And if you look closely, you can see them often in earlier art where you've got the fur pattern. You can see the fur pelts all sewn together in a pattern, usually a Vare pattern actually. And then there's a solid color on the other side. So this was actually, I've seen this depicted especially with 12th century depictions of the Magi, where they're all together in a bed sleeping and having their dream, and their bedspread is turned back so you can see the fur on one side and the silk on the other. And so it says that it was lined with Alexandrian silk. So if you want to make a very fine, actually medieval bedspread, then you want fur on one side and silk on the other for maximum luxury. This is #goals. I do intend to make one of these at some point. People dressed so elegantly once upon a time. Oh yes, yes indeed. Yes, they did. Everyone did, men and women. I wish men still dressed the way they did hundreds of years ago. The way they dress now is just sad in the West. Yeah, real sad. Okay, so then we have, this description of 2 candelabra of fine gold, the lesser of the 2 worth a fortune, right? So we have all of these details that tell us just how splendid this ship is, and also that it is definitely not just any ship. And Gijmar seems to either accept it or ignore it, Of course, he seems to ignore it, because then there's this line that says after the vessel takes off, unmanned magical ship sails away, he's upset. What a moron. Come on, Gijmar, wake up, man. Okay, so then he lands in this foreign exotic country, and it's an ancient city is all we know of. It's an ancient city, and it's the capital of its realm. And again, it occupies this fantasy land that is never given any sort of specific details. And that's the nature of a fantasy story, right? So here Guigemar comes to this place, and he finds this lady who is basically in a beautiful gilded prison, right? It has walls of green marble around it, which, especially to someone coming from northern France, modern day northern France, Brittany, marble was not a local material in that part of the world. So marble walls would have struck a French audience or an English audience, because Marie was actually writing in the English court, believe it or not. 12th century Northern European audiences, it would have struck them as being very exotic and wondrous. So she's in this keep, basically, that's surrounded by this wall, and she's kept there alone with a damsel, with basically her niece. Now, the descriptions of the interiors are very fascinating. So this is the 12th century. This is before the Renaissance, before the rediscovery of classical texts. And the mentions here of these classical references to gods and goddesses and to ancient Roman writers underscores the spurious nature of the claim that the Renaissance was the rediscovery of classical texts and ideas. Bullshit. This 12th century lay composed by Marie de France specifies multiple ancient references Ovid here, right? So here's the description of, and Greek and ancient Roman goddesses, right? Here's the description of this chamber. It was painted with images all around. Venus, the goddess of love, was skillfully depicted in the painting. Her nature and her traits were illustrated, whereby men might learn how to behave in love and to serve love loyally, right? So Venus is depicted. 12th century people knew who Venus was. There was no rediscovery in the 14th or 15th century. People knew the whole time. They knew about Alexander the Great. They knew about Julius Caesar. And then Marie de France specifically references Ovid here. Ovid's book, the one in which he instructs lovers how to control their love, was being thrown by Venus into a fire. And she was excommunicating all those who had ever perused this book or followed its heretical teachings, right? So here Marie is referencing Ovid's Book of Love, and she's calling it, she's basically very not subtly saying that it is nonsense. So yeah, there isn't a rediscovery in the 15th century. Many of the texts were continued, were read, were enjoyed in various forms all along. There are some that are rediscovered in the 15th century, some Greek ones specifically, but Latin texts, not so much. So this idea of the Book of Love being thrown by Venus into a fire is not a subtle allusion in this case. So this is where the wife was locked up, the lady whose name we never ever learn, right? And this is where Gijmar encounters her. And he is basically struck by more pain. And she is struck by pain. And the way that love is depicted here in as being a kind of wound. A deep and abiding wound that causes suffering is not necessarily the most encouraging, but there it is, right? So he's struck by love, she's struck by love, and they endure it this way, they go about this way, neither one acknowledging their love, their feelings to the other, until finally, it's the damsel who intervenes, right? The damsel, the young lady, the niece finally says to Gijmar, look, buddy, wake up. If you plead your suit, it will be well received, right? She tells him. And so finally he confesses to the lady and the lady confesses to him. But then there's this interesting bit of manipulation, right? This line, this series of lines that he lays on her where he says, well, you know, we should just act on this love now. Because, you know, if you were a perfidious woman and you had many lovers, then it would be natural and, of course, normal for you to literally play hard to get, because you would need to make the appearance of being virtuous. But I know that you are virtuous, being locked up here in this tower and having access to no one except for your niece, right? I know that you're virtuous. So because I already know that you're virtuous, and because you are virtuous, you should just yield to me instantly, and we should explore the full breadth and depth of our love, right? It's a very interesting bit of mental gymnastics that he basically says only unvirtuous and unchaste ladies who had many lovers play hard to get, because they want to present the seeming of being virtuous through their reluctance, right? But virtuous women who do not have many lovers and who are in fact, you know, mostly chaste, or chaste in this case, they should consent instantly to prove their virtue. It's a very, it's a very uncomfortable little bit of mental gymnastics, but I think being married to a jealous old man, she's not terribly, yeah, he's handsome. He's very handsome. He's very pleasant to be around. So I don't think that she needs much convincing, let's be honest. There was one little detail that was very interesting, though, the mention of the priest that keeps the keys to the gate to her compound, shall we say, that he has lost his member. He had lost his nether member, which is a very strange way of referring to it. I'm not certain how one loses it, but he did. And so Gijmar and the lady engage in this relationship where they're basically in this perfect idyllic world of this compound where no one interferes with them. They interact with almost no one. They are not, but also they are not presented with any challenges. Their love is untested because everything is done for them. Everything is provided for them. Food is brought for them, right? You have the damsel to do the cleaning and help the lady dress and all of that. So this is a fantasy within a fantasy. So their love is really, is it real love if it's untested? And that is sort of the point of this story. Love cannot be love if it does not involve suffering and trials and tribulations to strengthen it and to prove its strength. And thus the tribulations eventually come, right? There's this almost this womb-like existence that they have within this compound, this beautiful tower with this beautiful marble wall and this beautiful grassy garden that overlooks this beautiful harbor, this shining sea and all of that, right? So then Fortuna's wheel turns and they're discovered by the evil chamberlain, right? Not all chamberlains are evil. I just like to point that out. And so we have that brief action scene, which I think is really fantastic, when, you know, the old man, the old husband, the elderly husband and his henchman. And I know the word henchman in modern English has some real connotations, and you probably imagine your average James Bond henchman, but that's not, henchman comes from the word hengstman, and it just meant the men who served the Lord. So in 15th century expense accounts, henchmen are mentioned all the time as being paid. That was just his closest servants. The henchmen were the Lord's closest servants. Those are all henchmen are. It's not meant pejoratively here, even though they're technically the bad guys in the story. Yep. Comments. Interesting. You know your stuff. Mad props to you. Thank you, Jessica. Yeah, if you're all enjoying, please like and subscribe and hit the notifications bell and make sure all are on or you will never get notified. Appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, so Gijmar is, the henchmen come into the chamber. They try to attack Gijmar, and we get this fun adventure scene that's honestly almost comical. So he doesn't have any weapons, right? He sailed to this land with no weapons somehow. So he grabs a wooden rod on which clothes were usually hung, and he waits for the assailants. So this is interesting because we don't have any evidence of clothes being hung with any kind of regularity. But apparently here's evidence that at least in 12th century France, Brittany and England, that they had wooden rods for hanging clothing. Now, does that mean the clothes were stored that way? I don't think so. I think this might be a wooden rod that you do see depicted in 15th century depictions of tailor shops and furrier shops usually. And I think it was there to actually let the garments hang out the night before, so that you pull them out of the chests where they're actually stored, because no hanging closets at this time, and you let it hang the night before so that by the next morning, the folds have fallen out of it. I don't think it was for permanently storing clothes. I think it was basically a rod on which you could let your clothing de-wrinkle by the next morning, is what I suspect. Still, it's fun to imagine him grabbing this big rod, this closet rod, right? This wooden closet rod. And as it says, Gijmar will make some of them suffer for this. Before they get close to him, he'll have maimed them all. So, our puissant knight, he might not have a sword, but he can still cause some damage with a wooden staff, basically. And that's not usual. Like, knights are supposed to be, swords, right, as the knightly weapon. Staffs are what peasants use, but no, Gijmar knows his stuff. And I just love imagining this scene, like one of those fighting montages with Gijmar wearing probably nothing but brays or something like that, and just laying all of these henchmen down. Which leads us to the aged and jealous husband. Basically, what are his options? Gijmar is clearly a puissant knight, way younger than he is, and able to lay waste with just this rod. So the Lord stares at him and then decides to try to engage with him, figure out what's going on, see if he can convince him to leave. Basically Gijmar realizes that, well, okay, he's taking care of these henchmen, but there will be more if he doesn't leave now. So, the Lord, the old jealous husband, therefore escorts Gijmar down to the ship where it's apparently been this whole time, just hanging out. And it's got to be a magic ship if it's hanging out in a harbor for years at this point, and it's still in working order. That's not how ships work. That's not how wooden ships work for certain. So Gijmar gets onto the ship, and the ship immediately carries him away, right? But this is not before Gijmar and his lady having swapped the knots of love, right? You've heard of the metaphor of the knot of love. In this story, it's not a metaphor. It is a literal truth. So first, the lady insists that she be allowed to put a knot in his shirt on the right side. And it's a knot that only she would be able to get out, and without anyone else would have to use scissors or a knife. And this is another classical reference, right? The Gordian knot, right? And actually, it just occurred to me thinking about this, part of the ancient Roman wedding ceremony was the lady, the wife to be, the bride, being dressed in a garment that had a knot on it that the husband would have to undo, right? A tunic with a knot on the front that he would have to undo. Now, I can't say that for Marie de France, this is a 12th century French noblewoman living in the English court, right? I can't say for certain that she's making that reference here, that she would have known about that, but why not? She knows about Ovid. She knows about his book of love. So why not? This could be a kind of reversal of the ancient Roman practice of the bride with the knot. So here's the groom with the knot, and he is to be her groom until she unknots the knot, thereby finishing the wedding ceremony, right? Oh, goodness. Let me see. Nevis says, so to the topic of staves, well, staves are actually advantageous over most swords, much greater reach and power. Yeah, Nevis, 100%. A stave is definitely a more effective weapon. You'll get no argument from me, but you know, knights and their prejudices. Okay, so we've got this knot on this shirt that she puts in it. And then he says, well, wait a minute. That's not fair. I need to put a knot on you. But instead of just doing the same thing, he gives her a belt that has a knot in, or that has a buckle on it. And it's knotted in such a way that it can only be undone by him and by no one else unless the other people were to use scissors or a knife. So same idea. She's got this belt. Now, I know some of you are going to cry chastity belt. And I think this might be one of the texts that people have historically used to say, look, it's evidence of a chastity belt. It's not a chastity belt. It's just a belt. It's just a belt around her hips. It doesn't have any complex bits that go between her legs or anything like that. It's just a belt that she wears against her skin because that's an intimate way to wear it, but it is not a chastity belt like that, right? What it is a sign that she is his. The knot on his shirt is a sign that he is hers. The knot in the belt that he gives her is a sign that she is his. And both of these items, the shirt and the belt, are mentioned by Andreas Capellanus in the 12th century as being gifts that are appropriate between lovers, belts and shirts. Why? Because a shirt is an intimate garment. It's the one that's worn against your body. Shirt is not a tunic. Shirt is this. It's a smock. It's the kamicha. It's the chemise. Right? It's the linen layer that is against your skin. So it is the most intimate layer of clothing. And by giving it, by a lover giving it to another, their lover, one lover to another, that is a very intimate kind of gift. And sometimes even ladies would actually would make these shirts themselves, making it an even more intimate gift. So the shirt, it doesn't say anything about the lady having given the shirt to Gijmar, the knotted shirt to him, just that it was his shirt. However, after a couple of years of being there, it would shock me greatly if she had not had to make him a fresh shirt. Just saying, things do wear down after time. The belt being given to her, that's a very typical, a girdle being given by one lover to another, very typical. Now, there's a good practical reason for her to wear it right against her skin. And that's because if she wears it over top of her clothes and it's not ever supposed to come off, that could be problematic for, hygiene. So it being right against her skin means she can still be kept properly clean. Her clothes can be changed regularly, etc. Right? But also because it being right against her hips, right against her loins, it says, that's definitely a very clear reference. Yeah. Okay, to the comments. Queen Catherine made Queen Henry shirts. Yep, absolutely, Susan. But that's 16th century, not the 12th century. So I just want to keep that clear. That's a long distance between the 12th and the late 15th, early 16th century. Okay, so they each have this knotted garment that they have vowed to keep upon themselves until they find each other again, right? And so they are practically setting themselves up. It's almost as though they both acknowledge that their love needs to be tested. It's at a subconscious level. Obviously, they both bemoan the fact that they're about to be separated. But the fact that they acknowledge that this is what's going to happen and they take precautions to build a bond, a physical bond between them, indicates that at some level they understand that the kind of love they have now, this untested love, isn't really a deep and abiding love. And so Gijmar must go away. He must go away. Their love must be tested for it to be considered a real love, worthy of the ages, as we're now reading about it here, right? So Gijmar goes back home. He finds his servants again. He reestablishes himself as the great and puissant knight. Everyone wants him to get married, of course, and he says, no, not unless the lady who can undo the knot in my shirt can be found. And what I love is that they have the image here of ladies and maids again, lining up to undo this shirt. Let me see, where was that line said? It was fairly funny. Let me see. Let me see. Where was that line? She went aboard. Yeah, news traveled throughout Brittany. All the women and girls came to try their luck, but none could untie the knot, right? Like the Gordian knot that's just waiting there, waiting for, the prophesied king to come and unknot it. So here we have Gijmar with his knotted shirt and all the women, all the ladies, all the maids and the ladies coming to try their luck to unknot his shirt. Kind of like the Cinderella shoe, right? Like this kind of, there's similar ideas here. Right. So then eventually the lady gets locked up in an even more oppressive tower in darkness and isolation. And just at the point where she has despaired so much that she is contemplating ending it all, the door magically unlocks and she makes her way down to the harbor and no one stops her. And magically the ship is there where she had contemplated terminating her life, right? So magic is in the air. Apparently, Venus has deigned that they have suffered enough. She gets into the ship, as they always do. They always get on the magic ship. And she is carried to Brittany, where she lands, but she doesn't land. The trials aren't over yet. They still have more trials. We still have to have a war over this love, right? So she comes to Brittany and she ends up in the hands of Lord Meriaduc, who is apparently one of Guigemar's friends, frenemies. It's kind of hard to tell, right? And of course, he falls in love with her. What is love, though? It says here, he felt for her a love as great as he'd ever had for a woman. That's just relative to the way he'd felt about women before. We have no way to measure that on an absolute scale of love, right? So he basically makes her a captive in a guilt cage, which is pretty common trope in these stories, right? And he keeps trying to woo her and woo her and woo her, and she keeps refusing him until he gets really angry and he realizes that there is a knight who shares a similar story about a knot that must be undone before he will acknowledge the love of the person who has undone it. And so he mentions this to her because he's so angry. He says, there's another one like you in this land, a very worthy knight who avoids in a similar manner taking a wife by means of a shirt, the right side of which is knotted. It can't be untied except by using scissors or a knife. I think you must have made this knot. Meriaduc adroitly observes. He's right, she did. So the lady is given hope. She's given hope that she might find her Gijmar again, because this has to be he. How many men with knotted shirts must be wandering around Brittany? Not many, she rightly assumes, right? Sounds like Excalibur. Yeah, it's all very, there's some similarities, right, across these tales about magic objects waiting for the right person to come along and undo them. Absolutely, 100%. So eventually, Meriaduc proclaims a tournament against the lord he was fighting. So he's at a war with his neighbor. And I love this. In the 12th century, he's like, well, we're at war, we're fighting over land and resources, as we always are in the 12th century. Let's have a tournament. I'm going to, as part of our conflict, I'm going to declare a tournament against you. We're going to have a passage of arms. And, he recruits knights to go be on his team, because tournaments in this time are very much team activities. It's basically melees, two sides of a melee, and you have two captains, and it's a mess. They were messy. People died all the time. And he specifically, if this is all part of his ploy to try to get the lady to give her love to him, he knows full well that Gijmar would come in amongst these knights, Gijmar being this puissant knight who's all about going out and making warfare, right? It's one of the favorite things to do. The sword and the brace, nice Nevis. So he specifically asked Gijmar, as a special favor, as his friend and companion, not to let him down in this hour of need, but to come and help him, right? So Gijmar sets out and comes out richly supplied, leading more than 100 knights. So, if Gijmar is bringing 100 knights and other people are maybe bringing knights, this is going to be one hell of a messy melee. So Marmaduke entertains him. His sister is there who's taking care of the lady, and he orders his sister to bring the lady to the hall lavishly outfitted, it says. And they came hand in hand. So imagine these two ladies entering the hall holding hands, which I think is a really lovely image, right? Clearly there is a bond between them. But of course, the lady hears Gijmar's name mentioned, and so she grows pale and concerned. She's very upset, right? She doesn't know if this is actually him or if she's just being tested. And then when she enters, Gijmar looks at her and notices her appearance and behavior, and he thinks he recognizes her. And this is a little bit weird to me. He thinks he recognizes her. But then he says, now that was a foolish thought. I know it can't be she. Women look alike. Right? Women look alike. Really? Women look alike, huh? Okay, well. Oh, Gijmar, you are an idiot. Women do not look alike. Not even if they're wearing their hair in the stylish fashion of married noblewomen in the 12th century, they still do not all look alike. But maybe because he can't believe it could be she, because how could it be she, he convinces himself that all women must look alike. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt here. But seriously, he'd be in the doghouse if I heard he said, if I were the lady and I heard that Gijmar said that all women look alike, I'd be pretty angry. After we spent several years together, we all look alike. Really? Bad boy, Gijmar. Bad night, no biscuit. But before that, there was another detail, a sartorial detail. It's a little bit of a disturbing passage to some of you, but it doesn't seem to actually lead to any kind of actual assault, any kind of actual invasive assault. There's this scene where after Marmaduke proclaims angrily about, her and this knotted belt and this other knight who has this knotted shirt. And he mentions the knotted shirt and the lady faints, basically. She swoons because she can't believe that she's actually hearing about her Gijmar. Right, so then Marmaduke takes her in his arms and he cuts the laces of her tunic. So for those of you making 12th century clothes, I'm going to focus on the sartorial stuff, the fashion stuff. For those of you making 12th century clothes, this is evidence of lacing being used in those fitted garments, because it's not in the visuals that we see of ladies tightly laced, what's called a bliot in the 12th century. We can't really see the lacing, but here is documentary evidence in this story about lacing being present, because he cuts it so he can, get to the belt that's underneath of her tunic, right? So if you're making 12th century clothes, you can reasonably use this as documentation for lacing in the garment. And I'm going to say the laces are on the side. The laces are not in the back and they're not in the front. They're in the side in this era, which is why you can't really see them very well in the art. But yeah, evidence of lacing in 12th century ladies' garments. Okay, so back to where we were, back to this exchange where Marmaduke tries to, set this whole big drama up with the knotted shirt. And so he convinces Gijmar to let his sister try the shirt on, right? Try to undo the knot in the shirt. He says, "My lord, please let this girl try to untie your shirt to see if she can manage to do it." And Gijmar answers, "Certainly." And he summoned a chamberlain who was in charge of the shirt. So there was a chamberlain. Gijmar had one chamberlain whose sole job was to care for this shirt, right? That elevates it to the status of relic. So this is, another of these allusions to the shirt being a kind of magical item that's almost like a holy relic, right? So the chamberlain brings the shirt. It was given to the girl, but she couldn't untie it at all. To the sister. The lady knew that very well, though. Her heart is greatly agitated, for she would love to try to untie it if she dared and could. Marmaduke saw this clearly. He was as sorry as could be, because he had unwittingly kicked the beehive, right? I don't know what he thought he would accomplish here. Surely he should have guessed that this is how it was going to go. But then he basically says, "My lady, now try to untie it if you can." Of course, she takes the shirt. She easily unties it. Gijmar is thunderstruck. Why is he thunderstruck? What an idiot. He should not be surprised at all. He already thought he recognized her. Ladies don't all look like each other. Right? But, you know, then he says, "Beloved sweet creature." He still can't believe it. So he insists on seeing the belt that he gave her. And he obviously doesn't, he says, "Let me see your body, the belt I put on you." He doesn't mean she should strip there in front of everyone. He means, like, let me see it in the way when a child says, "Let me see it," they actually mean, "Give it to me." Right? So he basically he puts his hands on her hips and he can feel the belt through her tunics because she's probably wearing silk, which isn't really going to do much to hide the outline of that belt. Right? He detects the belt and he realizes it's her. The belt is what makes him realize it's her. Gijmar. Well, we all think, you know, you would think at this point in the story, okay, they found each other. Yay, they live happily ever after. Nope. Not at all. Not at all. Margaret doubles down and basically says, yeah, I'm not going to give you to her. Gijmar tries to strike a deal. He says, "Look, I will be in homage to you. I will be your vassal for the next 2-3 years. I'll bring 100 knights, a knight's fee," right? This is still very, very common in 12th century France and Brittany and England, right? You have the knight's fee as a vassal. Literally, I will serve you with enough people to take care of your neighbor. I know you're at war with your neighbor, so let me help you finish this. Let me help you finish this for good. But Margaret is apparently so blinded by his love for the lady that he refuses it. He basically boastfully says, "Gijmar, my handsome friend, I'm not so harried or so afflicted by any war that you can bargain with me about this. I found this lady and I propose to take care of her and defend her against you." Right. Because the tournament that he called wasn't a tournament to try to end the war with his neighbor because, you know, he's apparently doing so well. Well, Gijmar realizes that he's at a disadvantage, so he gallops away, and we think, oh my God, he's just leaving the lady there. Well, he probably doesn't have much choice because the alternative is to fight his way out of this castle of Lord Margaret with all of Margaret's men, right? So Gijmar realizes he needs to leave and regroup and come back. And so he does. He regroups. He comes back. What does he do? He brings an army back and he lays siege to Margaret's castle, but they can't take the castle. So instead, he lays siege to the village and he basically starves everyone, kills everyone, gets all the resources from the village, and ultimately captures the castle and destroys it and kills his lord. And he leads away his mistress with great rejoicing, all his pain now at an end. The end. It is such a dark ending to this love affair that there's all this death, all of these people, destruction that has just been left in the wake of this love affair. But the two lovers ride off happily into the sunset. And it's a little telling that that is where their story ends, them riding off happily into the sunset, rather than the realities of living together as lovers for the rest of their life and the trials and tribulations that entails. Their story ends here at the end of a siege. So yeah, so standard knight stuff. Yep, that's pretty much correct. Okay, are there any questions about Gijmar, the tale of this Breton knight and his lady love, whose name we never know. We never learn. It's a very interesting story. The couple of spots where it takes left turns are just very unexpected. You know, the bisexual stag, the war at the end. Yeah. Take this moment to encourage everyone to double tap your screen or hit the thumbs up and subscribe and click the notification bell. I'm going to briefly grab a quick, I left all my drinks over there. I'm mic'd up, so I'll keep talking. Yeah, I'm just gonna grab a quick sip of beverage here. Some of my tea coming back. So what did you all think of Gijmar, the tale of the knight who discovered his sexuality in the most typical knight way you can, I suppose? Yeah. It's interesting that it is the first story in the collection, and as I said at the beginning, I don't think that's an accident. I think that's on purpose. Okay, so the next text, and probably the last text, considering how long it took us to get through that one, the next text we're going to read is from a book called Court and Civic Society, very dully titled, Life in the Burgundian Low Countries. And this is an excerpt from Olivier de la Marche's Chronicles. He was a chronicler of the Burgundian court, and he chronicled a lot of different aspects of the court happenings, the great ceremonies, the great moments in the history, especially of Charles the Bold, as he's sometimes called, or Charles the Rash, as he's other times called. And we're going to basically pick up, we had started months ago, you may or may not recall, months ago, we had started with the account of Margaret of York's wedding to Charles the Bold, right? And so we're going to pick up with that, and we're actually going to discuss the day one of her entry into Bruges, the wedding dinner. And there was something else I actually cropped up here too. Dinner in the Middle Ages was lunch. That's what they called lunch, was dinner. Supper is what happens in the evening. So if you read about dinner in a medieval text, they are talking about what we would call lunch. It wasn't called lunch back then, right? So that's a midday meal, not an end of the day meal. Let me see, comments. I enjoyed the story. I'd love to learn the skill of storytelling. Oh, Gabeline, thank you so much for, thank you for enjoying. Yeah. So we are now, I'm taking you from the 12th century to the 15th century. This book is super expensive to buy. Court and Civic Society in the Burgundian Low Countries. So I recommend Interlibrary Loan. There's a lot of fantastic chronicles, primary source chronicles describing all aspects of life in the Burgundian court from the 1420 to 1530. Not so interested in the stuff that comes with Charles V and Philip the Handsome, but there's a lot of stuff that is pre-16th century in here too. So very good, very interesting. And we're therefore moving up to 1468, July. It is hot as hell. It is a hot summer. And we know that because when Margaret of York arrives in Calais, the mayor and the aldermen of Calais are all arrayed to greet her, of course, for her first step of her sort of progress through the various lands to heading towards Bruges. They greet her and they're wearing their robes, their gowns, are lined in fur because they want to be as splendid as possible. And the chronicler describes them as sweating profusely. So it's a hot summer. It's unfortunate because everyone is going to be wearing their most splendid in all the layers, velvet and fur, as we're going to find out as we read. So Margaret of York has arrived in Bruges. And she has arrived there. She's meeting Charles there and her mother-in-law, Isabella of Portugal. And so here we are at the point where she finally enters Bruges. Right, this is part of this great wedding entourage, and her entourage is hundreds of people. She's got hundreds, probably 1,000 people in her entourage. This is quite a splendid affair. Margaret of York was the sister of Edward of York, Edward IV of England, as it was said in the 15th century. And so she's not yet become a powerful princess, but she's about to. And she represents a union that makes France really nervous, because Burgundy is the more powerful political player at this stage. Not France, Burgundy. England allying with Burgundy at this particular time is real bad news for France. Right, okay, so here we are. I want you to imagine hot and humid. That's the mindset in which you now need to be. Okay. In such an order and array, my lady, Margaret, entered her city of Bruges. I must begin by recounting the tableau set up for her joyous entry. The streets were hung very richly with gold and silk cloth and with tapestries. And as for the tableau, I have remembered 10 of them. The first was of God accompanying Adam and Eve in paradise. The second, how Cleopatra was given in marriage to King Alexander. And in this way, the appropriate tableaux were set up as far as the ducal residence, the Prinzenhof, for those who are wondering. In front of the residence was a rich tableau painted in gold and azure, in the middle of which were two lions rampant, holding a shield with the arms of the Duke of Burgundy. And around the tableau were 12 blazons of arms of the ducal lands, the duchies, and the counties. And on the top of the tabernacle on one side was St. Andrew, and below it were the flints as devices, and the motto of the Duke, Je l'ai emprunt, I have undertaken it. On either side of the tableau were two archers richly painted and in relief. One was a Greek drawing a Turkish bow, and for the duration of the feast, wine from the bone sprang from the end of his arrow. On the other side was a German firing a crossbow, and from the end of his crossbow sprang Rhenish wine. The wine from both fell into large stone vats, which everyone could fill up from and drink at their pleasure. Within the courtyard, toward the spicery, was a large pelican, which pecked at its breast, and instead of the blood that should have come out, there flowed hippocras, which fell into a wicker basket, subtly done so that nothing was lost, but that everyone could partake of it at their pleasure. Let us now return to the arrival of that beautiful lady. She entered the courtyard around midday. The Duke's mother was waiting for her at the entrance of the hall, accompanied by the Duke's wife and my Lady of Argouges, with a good 100 other ladies and damsels of rank. When the litter drew near, the Duke's mother went before it, but soon the yeomen of the crown, who were ordered to do this, took the litter on their shoulders and carried it away from the horses in front of my lady and placed it on the ground. There the litter was uncovered, and the Duke's mother helped the beautiful girl out of the litter, and to the sound of trumpets and clarions led her by the hand to her bedchamber. For the moment, we will keep silent about the ladies and knights and return to describe the organization of the household. To begin with, the common offices. In the kitchen, there were 300 men. In the saucery, 24. In the cupbearing office and pantry, 60 men each, and in the spicery, 15. Generally, all the offices were heavily manned. In the residence, there was a little room set aside in the front of the chapel where the Duke alone dined. And next to this room was a large room where all the chamberlains ate. Further on was a bigger room where the chief stewards and the regular men at court ate, and this one was full several times with a great number of gentlemen, archers, pages, officers of arms, trumpeters, minstrels, and other musicians who were there for the feast. Moreover, there were 7 rooms in the house for the entertainment of guests, one of which was occupied by the bastard of Burgundy, accompanied by my lord of La Roche. In the other rooms were my lord Jacques de Saint-Pol, my lord of Arcy and of Gruthuse and of Berg, and several others who were accompanying them. In each room there was a steward, and men ordered to serve them there. To hold a great court, a room had been built in a large courtyard, which was called the tennis court. I'll talk more about that, the Great Hall, in a moment. It's pretty splendid. The room had been hastily made very large, high and spacious, out of carpentry. It was illuminated so well and so perfectly through glass windows that everyone said that it was one of the most beautiful rooms they had ever seen. High up, the room was hung with blue and white woolen cloth. On the sides of the walls were tapestries and hangings showing the story of Jason, by which the beginning of the mystery of the Golden Fleece could be understood. The tapestry was completely made of gold, silver, and silk. I do not believe that such a large and costly tapestry had ever been made. The room was lit by candelabra made of wood, painted white and blue, and from the ends of the room there hung two chandeliers, which were very subtly made, since in each of the structures, a man could be hidden. The chandeliers were made up like castles, and their bases were high rocks and mountains, which were very subtly made. And on the paths which led round the rocks, one could see figures on foot or on horseback, men, women, and an assortment of beasts, which were very well made and subtly done. By the way, I'm saying subtly because that's how it's pronounced in the 15th century. It's just more fun. Anyway. At the base of each of the chandeliers were 7 very large mirrors, so well constructed that one could see everything that was happening in the room through these mirrors. The mountains were covered with trees, grass, leaves, and flowers. They were certainly admired and looked at by everyone. They were made by a very ingenious man called Master Jean Scalquin, the canon of Saint-Pierre of Lille. For several days, Scalquin had men placed in the chandeliers who made half of them turn as briskly as windmills. Dragons jumped out of the rocks, spewing fires and flames in a very strange way, and one could not see at all how the contrivance worked. At the end of the room, in front of the main door, 2 large platforms, one on top of the other, had been made, decorated with fine tapestries, to seat and install the ladies and damsels who had come to see the feast, and who kept their identities hidden. In this room, 3 tables had been set up, one of which was at the top end, positioned transversely as the table of honor. It was higher than the others, reached by steps, and along its length, made of very costly cloth of gold, was a costly tester, and a hanging so large that it made a cloth covering the seat. Along both lengths of the room ran the other 2 laid tables, both beautiful and very long, and in the middle of the room was a tall, costly, lozenge-shaped sideboard. Its lower section was closed up like a tournament list, hung with tapestries showing the arms of the Duke, and in front of it began steps and gradations laden with vessels, the lowest of which were the most common, and the highest the most costly and delicate. Yeah, you definitely want to keep those out of the hands of knights. In other words, the lowest of the dishes were of gold-plated silver, and higher up the golden vessels garnished with precious stones, of which there were a great number. On top of this sideboard was a costly cup garnished with precious stones, and at the corners there were large whole unicorn horns, very large and beautiful. The vessels that decorated the sideboard were not the only ones used that day, for there were other silver vessels, pots, and cups with which the room and chambers were served that day. In truth, the Duke could amply furnish his feast with silver vessels, for Duke Philip, whose soul rests with God, had left him more than 60,000 marks worth of silver plate for the purpose, wrought and ready to serve. The tables were nobly covered and laid out for dinner, and before long the Duke's mother led out her daughter-in-law, the noble wife, Princess Margaret. Water was poured and the dishes set down, as will be described. Margaret was seated in the middle of the table, and next to her, to her right, was the Duke's mother. At the end of the table, on that side, was the Lady of Burgundy. On the left side had been placed the Duchess of Norfolk and my Lady of Argois, but because the Duchess was tired, she dined in her room that day, and there was no one next to my Lady of Argois. The Countess of Scales and the Countess of Charny were placed behind the newlywed, to help in supporting her, as is the usual custom on these occasions. Bridesmaids, as bridesmaids actually used to function. The other tables were filled with ladies and damsels, very richly attired and dressed. As for the service, the new Duchess was served by the cupbearer and squire carver, and the pantler, all of them English, knights and men of noble households. The usher of the dining hall cried out, "Gentlemen, the food is ready." And so we went to the buffet table to look, and around the table, all the ducal relations and all the knights of the order, as of noble houses, 2 by 2 after the trumpeters, walked up to the food. Then a great number of officers of arms, dressed in their tabards, and then came all the household stewards, my lords as well as my ladies, the last of whom was my lord Guillaume Biche, first chief steward of the household, who had taken the food to the buffet table. The pantler came next, followed by 10 or 12 knights and people of noble households who carried the food. The Duke's mother did not wish to be served at all that day with her food covered, but left the honor to her daughter-in-law, as is correct. Now, to abridge the account of how the room was organized, there were 4 gentlemen arranged, and after each one of them, 10 gentlemen of rank. These 44 men served the food to the room, which seemed to be served very attentively. The dinner was served in 3 stages, and it should not be forgotten that all the rooms, all the chambers, and the large dining room I have discussed were all served with silver vessels. The lords in charge of the event led the lords, knights, and English gentlemen, who are apparently separate from the lords and the knights, through the rooms and in a place called the gallery. The papal legate dined, accompanied by ambassadors of kings and princes who were there, together with all the bishops of this house. The Duke dined in the room assigned to him, and all the chamberlains in their correct order. This was a very beautiful thing to see because they were all dressed the same in the livery of the Duke, and all the servants in the correct order, each according to his rank. And one could see no one among them dressed but in velvet and thick gold chains in a great number. Well, so much for my description of the dinner. No need to talk about the food. Onward to the joust. Okay, so there's a lot of very interesting details here. How's life? Good morning. Welcome. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. So everyone, first off, I would like to invite you to ask any questions you may have now. That was the passage that I wanted to read, and we'll continue next week with more of Margaret of York's amazing wedding to Philip of Burgundy, or Charles the Bold of Burgundy. So any initial questions that you have. The fascinating thing is that if you are looking to recreate an authentic wedding feast and you have a lot of money, this is practically a step-by-step guide to how to set everything up. Now, I would like to, while you ask your questions, if you want to ask questions, while you ask them, I would like to mention specifically this great hall that they built. So this is taking place in Bruges. How many of you have been to Bruges? Bruges is not terrible. It's a little different than it was in the 15th century, but it's not terribly different. Need more liquid. So one of the things they mention is the need for space. You'll notice that not everyone is in the same hall. Various people are scattered across a variety of chambers, and they mention building a great hall in the tennis court. So this is an outdoor tennis court, not an indoor tennis court. And they mention this amazing structure. They describe how it's decorated. So for those of us who participate in living history or reenactment or recreation groups that actually build structures for events, temporary structures for events, a practice that is 100% documented in multiple chronicles from the Middle Ages. It's yet another way in which organizations like the SCA are accidentally authentic often, because most people who create those structures at, living history events or reenactment events or Renaissance fairs or whatever, they're doing it because it's what they want to do, because it will make their lives more comfortable. They're not necessarily doing it because they've researched the project and have based it on medieval precedent. But it's one of those ways that shows that humans are humans and basically want the same things. Meaning, we all want comfort, we all want luxury when we're out, generally doing our thing. Right? Okay. Comments or questions? Did I hear unicorn horn? Yes, you did. Yes, you did. Those unicorn horns are, of course, not real unicorn horns. They were narwhal horns. Unicorn horns in the Middle Ages were considered miraculous. They were considered, if every lord wanted to have one, every king definitely wanted to have one, because they thought it would remedy poisons, right? So if you had a poison beverage and you dip the unicorn horn in it, it should make it non-poisonous. Sadly, that of course didn't work because they're not unicorn horns, they're narwhal. They are narwhal tusks, right? That's what people thought were unicorn horns. So yes, you did hear unicorn horns, but they're narwhal tusks. Virginia, oh, one of my members, Virginia, thank you for being a member. Can't comment much at present due to my phone being broken, so it takes forever to type anything properly, but loving the stream as always, dear Contessa. Thank you, Virginia. I really appreciate your support. I'm sorry your phone is being difficult. You did hear unicorn horns, yep. So this predates the Field of the Cloth of Gold by 60, 70 years. So yeah, this is the 60 years, by 60 years. So it is definitely, the Field of the Cloth of Gold is not an original idea at all. So there's actually a description. I want to focus on this hall because it's really fascinating because it also gives us ideas on authentic medieval decoration for our spaces when we have events. And that fascinates me, decorating in a way that is documentable and beautiful and doable. So let me tell you something about this hall. So there's another account of this hall. It's not just Olivier de la Marche. And it's really excellent when we can have multiple chroniclers talking about the same thing, because then we can get different details. So there's a man named Fastre Olé, who describes the wooden hall. And he says, and this is the really fascinating part, it was built in Brussels as a modular structure. I have seen many a modular structure at events like Penzig. They are authentic. It was built in Brussels as a modular structure and brought by water to Bruges. So they carried there, I think there's a, what is the river? The river that connects Bruges to Brussels. Darn it. Just went straight out of my head. Right. So it was brought by barge. You know, rivers are the highways of the Middle Ages. They are the navigable ones anyway. They're much more reliable and much more direct and much faster for transport than overland. 100%. So they build the components for this hall in Brussels, and then they transport the components by barge to Bruges. Right. The hall, according to him, was 140 feet long and 70 feet wide. It's huge. That is a huge modular structure, right? It had to be elevated above the ground with earth and sand to prevent damage from rain. So if any of you are looking to build your wooden modular structure at a long-term camping event, you know, a week or two event, follow this advice from the original source that you should actually put down a layer of earth and sand so that it's above the rain, right? So the bottom doesn't get damaged by the rain. The rain will just flow down, right? It had 20 windows and 9 double windows. They were 14 feet high, entirely filled with glass. So glass making at this point is definitely getting very advanced, but even still, filling a 14-foot high window entirely with glass is a major flex. That is a major, major flex. One, it's a structural flex because you've got these, the glass isn't exactly doing a lot to support the building, right? And it's letting in all this light. So again, the idea of medieval spaces being dark and depressing, not this one. This one was bright in the middle of the day because of those massive windows filled with glass, right? And apparently there was a wooden shutter. So they had, so the idea of, it's the summer, right? They knew it was going to be summer. They knew it was going to be hot. And they actually put wooden shutters in also so they could open the shutters up and because the windows, they don't have openable windows like we think of it now. They had wooden shutters built in so that they can climate control the space. So they could open the shutters and let air in or close them to keep the air out and create a cross breeze, right? Very clever. And of course, because it's so tall, the heat can rise to the top, which is also a big benefit in the middle of the summer. Yep. So apparently, one of the reasons they had to build this hall is because the old Great Hall of the Prinsenhof leaked. The roof leaked. They had to re-roof it for this occasion. And then they actually refitted the Great Hall of the Prinsenhof with seats and tables so that common members of the household could sit and enjoy the feast too. So this was not a feast just for the wealthy. We saw at the list of guests that there were minstrels and archers, commoners included amongst the guests. The Duke and probably the Dowager Duchess Isabel of Portugal recognized the value of inviting everyone to this affair, of having all levels of society represented so that there would be buy-in to this new Duchess and buy-in to their regime, right? They recognized the value of soft power. This is soft power, right? And even though Charles made a lot of really bad decisions when it came to warfare, he didn't always make those same bad decisions when it came to the softer side of, of reigning in the Low Countries, right? So this hall, this massive hall, this 140-foot by 70-foot hall with 29 windows total, 20 regular windows and 9 double windows. So 14 feet tall, massive windows letting in all kinds of light, right? It was illuminated so well that everyone, through the glass windows, that everyone said it was one of those beautiful rooms they'd seen. High up in the ceiling, and this is an idea for decorating, especially if you're using a modern space for your medieval event, and you're looking for ways to transform your modern space, you can do it medievally and create a beautiful look at the same time for not much money. So high up, the room was hung with blue and white woolen cloth. So imagine entire lengths of woolen cloth, and woolen cloth is going to be broadcloth. So it's not going to be, 20 or 30 inches wide. It's going to be pretty wide, relatively speaking. And so imagine these long lengths of wool basically festooning up to the ceiling and down to the walls, right? Going all down the ceiling, and it is blue and white, alternating blue and white. Those are the colors of the Duchy of Burgundy, or blue and white. Right. So imagine this hall with alternating stripes of blue and white just going down the ceiling, basically swaddling the whole ceiling. Now, obviously, wool is expensive. And, yes, silk would have been possibly more expensive, but even still, covering your entire ceiling of your 140 by 70 foot hall is a flex. You don't need to use wool for your own event, right? If you can't afford wool, probably you can't. Wool is crazy expensive these days. Just get fabric in colors, and then you can just basically connect it at the corner of the ceiling and the wall, sidewall, run it to the center of the ceiling, and then connect it on the other side. And you've got this beautiful draping that covers all those ugly modern lights that modern buildings have and creates this beautiful effect. And pro tip, if you buy fabric by the bolt, it's almost always cheaper than buying it by the yard. So if you're looking to entirely swaddle a modern space to make it medieval, check out fabric outlets like Fabric Guru, or like real true fabric outlets, and then just buy whole bolts. Okay, so it's entirely swathed in white and blue wool, which is a nod also to the wool industry of Flanders, right? The big wool production center there in Flanders. And then on the sides, on the side walls, we have tapestries and hangings, and showing the story of Jason. Now, tapestries and hangings, those are two separate things. Modern people abuse the word tapestry. Tapestry is not just a wall hanging. Wall hangings are wall hangings. All tapestries are wall hangings. Not all wall hangings are tapestries. Get the difference. A tapestry is actually a weave of fabric. The way to weave to create a woven thing, right? It's a specific technique. And tapestries are woven depictions of things generally, right? So this behind me is technically not a tapestry. It is woven, but it is silk screened. This is technically a wall hanging. Over here, I've got an actual tapestry that's actually, the pattern is actually woven in it. So my point is that wall hangings could be a variety of things. They could be tapestries, but they can also be painted, where you literally just take a massive cloth and it is painted with the scene like this is. Or it can be embroidered, or it can be appliqued, but embroidery is not tapestry, right? It can be an appliqued wall hanging. So another great way to completely decorate your modern space and turn it into a medieval one is just to drape fabric down the walls. Cover everything, cover the ceiling, cover the walls. If you have people who are giddy about painting, you could do block printing and actually print your heraldry or the group's heraldry or whatever in block print and diaper it at regular intervals. Yeah. Basically, you could get away with creating this effect with not a lot of money, and then you'll completely transform a modern space into something magical and medieval. Okay, so, but what's depicted on the tapestries is not subtle. 15th century pronunciation of that word, and is intentional. Here it is. On its sides were tapestries and hangings showing the story of Jason, by which the beginning of the mystery of the Golden Fleece could be understood. And by this time, starting in the 14th century and going forward, every major polity in Europe starts devising their own, creating their own chivalric order. Right? You have the Order of the Garter in England, you've got the Order of the Star in France. Burgundy is the Order of the Golden Fleece. So it is, they are literally, you've got the blue and white, the colors of Burgundy, and now you've got depictions of the Order of the Golden Fleece, very clearly depicted, not subtle. You know, this is to celebrate the Burgundian state in all of the ways that it exerts power, and it's really focusing on the soft power side of things. Yeah, Gebeline, thank you. I hope you all can walk away with this with some actually practical tips on how you can decorate medievally, how you can create a medieval atmosphere for your own event. Right? This is wonderful to read about, but whenever I read these chronicles, I come away with tangible tips and ideas on how I can create medieval magic in my own space or at an event that I'm hosting, for instance. Right? You can beautify and do it authentically the way they did, because even in their own spaces, they acknowledged that bare walls were boring. Even though their walls were medieval, because they were medieval, it's the 15th century, they still wanted color. Again, the Middle Ages is beautiful, bright, and colorful. Blue and white, tapestries, wall hangings everywhere, giant windows letting light in because it wasn't dark and depressing. The medieval world was not viewed through a blue filter. Okay. So we have these tapestries depicting the Order of the Golden Fleece, the mystery of the Golden Fleece, you know, the story of Jason. And then we have these candelabra. So the room was lit by candelabra made of wood, which is interesting, that are painted white and blue. And that's probably because they needed a lot of candelabra to illuminate this massive hall, and they needed candelabra to illuminate every other room. So I suspect that in acknowledgement of all the expense that had already been put forth, the practical nature of needing that many light fixtures, they had these wooden candelabra made and then painted white and blue, so that again, you've got the colors, right? You've got the white and blue ceiling fabric, canopy, white and blue canopy of fabric on the ceiling. You've got the white and blue candelabra. You've got the Order of the Golden Fleece being depicted. It's not subtle. This is Burgundy. Yep. So, and from the two ends of the room, there were hung two chandeliers. Now, chandeliers or candelabra, you know, go on a table, right? They're like tabletop, or they could be on stands. We're not certain. We don't know if these are tabletop or candelabra that are on stands, but chandeliers are the ones that are suspended from the ceiling. And these chandeliers are amazing. The chandeliers were made up like castles. Can you imagine how wonderful that must have been? And their bases were high rocks. So there's a castle on high, basically crags of rocks and mountains, which were very subtly made. And on the paths which led around the rocks, one could see figures on foot or on horseback, men and women and an assortment of beasts. So this is masterful goldsmithing. And the court of Burgundy was famous for this, and many of these treasures are still around, not necessarily these chandeliers, but many of these treasures are still around. So you can get an idea of just how splendid and intricate and sophisticated 15th century goldsmithing was, right? So we've got rocks with figures on horseback, men, women, an assortment of beasts. And at the base of each of these chandeliers were 7 very large mirrors, so well constructed that one could see everything that was happening in the room through these mirrors. So imagine these mirrors. Now, it doesn't say whether these are brass mirrors or silvered mirrors. I'm going to bet they're silvered mirrors, though. I'm going to bet that the Duke of Burgundy and Margaret of York can afford silvered mirrors. What is the difference? So for most of history, mirrors were not like we understand them. Mirrors were polished brass, were polished metal, basically. But I think in the 12th century, don't hold me to that. Sometime along the path, someone gets the bright idea of a silvered mirror, so silvered glass. So you've got a silver backing and you've got glass on top. And that was medieval mirrors, right? And silver, it's silver foil on the back so that it actually with glass on top. And so that creates a whole different effect of a mirror. And then you have the more accurate mirrors that we know now. So I'm expecting these are silvered mirrors. And what that's going to do, these silvered mirrors hanging from the chandeliers that allow people to see everything that's happening everywhere in the room, that is going to take all of the light that is created by the candelabra and the chandeliers, and it's going to reflect it all over the room. So even at nighttime, it's going to be a bright, an amazingly bright space. Mirrors, silvered mirrors in this era are crazy expensive. So the fact that they had these apparently large, very large mirrors, 7 very large mirrors, at the base of each of these chandeliers is also a big expense in and of itself. And the effect it would have created would have been simply stunning, especially if you've got sunlight flooding in through the windows and then the sunlight hits those chandeliers and then that gets refracted around. This must have felt like a magical space, I'll be honest. It must have been quite stunning. And that's, of course, yes, it was remarkable. You know why it was remarkable? Because Olivier de la Marche remarks about it. So we know it was remarkable at the time. And Olivier de la Marche sees all, I mean, he lives at the court. He sees it all on a regular basis. And even still, this strikes him as amazing for his time, you know? Let me see. And you know what else is interesting is that the name of the maker, the person who made these chandeliers, is actually mentioned in this chronicle. Very often artisans go unremarked in the Middle Ages. We don't know who they were. You know, we just know this thing was made, and sometimes we might know the workshop, but not necessarily the specific artisan. But here, Olivier de la Marche actually calls him out by name. The person who made these amazing chandeliers was Master Jean Scalquin, who was a canon of Saint-Pierre of Lille, right? And, you know, he's the great mind behind this wondrous thing. And it's not just that the chandeliers were amazing to look at. He actually designed them so that men could be placed in the chandeliers and they could turn the chandeliers like windmills. Okay, so imagine these chandeliers with these mirrors, and there are men in them. They're so large and so sturdy that there are men in them who are turning the chandeliers like windmills so that those mirrors are then rotating and casting light. This must have been quite an effect. Special effects? Oh yes, but that's not all the special effects. As these chandeliers turned briskly as windmills, dragons jumped out of the rocks that were around the castle, spewing fire and flames in such a very strange way that one could not see at all how the contrivance worked. So we've got serious special effects. We've got fire. We've got dragons jumping out and spewing fire. And somehow this thing didn't burn down. That's the most amazing part at all. This great hall did not burn down. That's remarkable. Okay. And then at the end of the room, in front of the main door, 2 large platforms, one on top of the other, had been made, decorated with fine tapestries, to seat and install the ladies and damsels who had come to see the feast, but kept their identities hidden. So what's interesting, the implication there is that they weren't dining at the feast. They just wanted to see it. They just wanted to see the spectacle, right? This is a spectacle whether you're dining in it or whether you're watching. And it might have been more fun to be watching than to be dining, because if you're dining, you're subject to court protocol, right? If you're watching, you can just observe it all and take it all in. Yeah, so this was quite a thing. Now, the last detail we're going to discuss are these sideboards. Do any of you know what a sideboard was in the Middle Ages? It's not what a sideboard is now, actually. You have seen sideboards. If you have seen any medieval art, I guarantee you have seen sideboards. You just might not realize that's what you were looking at. If you think about 15th century depictions of great halls, noble great halls, especially from France and Burgundy and some from England, and you think that if you think about that shelving system that's usually on the side that has beautiful, beautiful dishes on it, like goblets and platters and ewers and pitchers, that is a sideboard. It is intended to display the tangible wealth of the lord and or lady who own that estate. So here we don't have one sideboard. And we don't have a small sideboard. No, no, no. In the center of the hall, they have placed lots and lots of gold, silver and gold plate and jewel crusted gold plate for everyone just to see how wealthy Charles is, right? How wealthy our Duke of Burgundy actually is. And by extension, the new bride. So here is a description of those. So they say, let me see. Along both lengths of the room ran the other two laid tables, both beautiful and very long, and in the middle of the room was a tall and costly lozenge-shaped sideboard. Its lower section was closed up like a tournament list. So imagine this massive, massive sideboard, but that goes up very, very high. It's very tall. It's not just a buffet like we think of in modern furnishings. It's got shelves that go up and they're stepped, right? Like a ziggurat. So its lower section was closed up like a tournament list, hung with tapestries. This thing is so big that it's been hung with tapestries. That's how big this sideboard is. It was hung with tapestries showing the arms of the Duke. And those tapestries still survive. There's actually, I think, one or two of them, at least one of them, maybe two of them have survived from this. And they were part of an exhibit 15 years ago, 16 years ago, about the riches of the Duchy of Burgundy. I have the catalog, unfortunately, not here with me, but I do have a replica of one of the tapestries, not here with me either, of the Duke's herald, of the Duke's arms, right? So this sideboard has tapestry showing the arms of the Duke, and in front of it began steps and gradations laden with vessels, the lowest of which were the most common, the highest, the most costly and delicate. In other words, Olivier spells it out for us. He wants to make sure you understand the level of wealth and luxury with which we are dealing here. In other words, the lowest of the dishes were of gold-plated silver, merely gold-plated, not real gold. Silver, but gold-plated. Common, relatively speaking, of course. And the higher up, the golden vessels, garnished with precious stones, of which there were a great number, right? So lower down was just the gilt silver, kind of the garbage stuff, right? The pieces about which there was less concern. And then, of course, you have the golden vessels and then the vessels garnished with gems. On top of this sideboard was a costly cup garnished with precious stones. And at the corners, there were large whole unicorn horns. Again, those unicorn horns are narwhal tusks, not actual unicorn horns. But everyone, it's hard to know whether people really believed they were unicorn horns or if they kind of all knew, this comes from a whale from the Arctic. I haven't read anything that shows that anyone actually knew that. So it could well be that people really naively believed that these were unicorn horns, right? So the vessels that decorated the sideboard were not the only ones used that day. Flex. For there were other silver vessels, pots, and cups with which the room and the chambers were served that day. In truth, the Duke could amply furnish his feast with silver vessels, for Duke Philip, may God rest his soul, had left Duke Charles more than 60,000 marks worth for the purpose, wrought and ready to serve. I looked up what a mark would be roughly worth in today's money a couple of years ago, and I don't remember the exact exchange rate, but it's millions upon millions of dollars. If not, it's a lot. It's a lot. There's a lot of wealth represented in that silver plate, with which there's enough to serve the whole feast. So this whole feast, for these hundreds of people, these hundreds upon hundreds of people being served, is being served on silver and gold. Yeah. Okay. Are there any questions about our feast? This wedding feast of the Duchess Margaret is one of these great spectacles that was chronicled in multiple languages all across 15th century Europe. There are chronicles in Spain that are preserved in Spain, in Portugal, in Poland, in Germany, in the Italies, right? This thing was attended by people far and wide, including the papal legate, by the way, and was noted because in its era, it was an insanely sumptuous affair. And the wedding feast lasts for 14 days. It's 2 weeks of tournaments and feasting. And this is just dinner. This is lunch. We were just talking about lunch, not even the feast at the end of the day. Okay, so yeah, are there any final questions about this amazing deal? Let me see if there's something I missed. Oh, we didn't even get to the service yet. Yeah, we'll pick up next time with the service. Let me see. Oh, we did talk about this. Oh goodness, yeah. Okay, we'll discuss this next week. We'll discuss the usher of the dining hall. Right? What some people call the steward of the hall. There's, an usher to regulate everything. Everyone is seated in their place. Everyone is by rank. So if you ever want to have an authentic medieval feast, you should, one, seat everyone by rank. You don't just get to sit with your friends. You have to sit by the people who are either higher or lower ranking than you, just by one. That crops up actually quite a lot. There is a ball documented in Ulm in 1503. The emperor pays a visit to the city of Ulm, the free imperial city of Ulm, or the imperial free city of Ulm. And the chronicler notes that the guests, it's an afternoon ball, first off, not an evening ball, an afternoon ball, as was the custom of Ulm. And the chronicler notes that the guests are seated by rank, right? And the men and women are seated separately, the men on one side of the hall, the ladies on the other, and that they're seated by rank. So this idea of seating people by rank is pretty ubiquitous throughout Western Europe. And so if you want to host an actually authentic feast, then you should, and it's a really like an actual feast, a formal affair, not just a meal. You might want to consider having your guests sit by order of precedence. And that could be interesting because it might actually allow you to sit next to people you would otherwise not have as dining companions. Yep. I'd love to see the menu recreated. Unfortunately, Susan, I haven't found the menu for this feast. I have not seen it documented anywhere. So the reason why we might not have any chronicles discussing the food that was actually served at this feast, and why we might not have an actual cookbook that probably was composed to commemorate the feast, is because of the French revolutionaries who burnt down the archives in Dijon, where a lot of the records for the Duchy of Burgundy were kept until they went up in flames at the end of the 18th century. Fuck you, French Revolution. You have destroyed so much history. Yep. Where was Marie? Marie is in 12th century France. Marie de France was, she was a courtier in the court of Henry II, but she's from France, right? So she was in England at that time. Yep. Okay. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us for today's medieval story time. If you've enjoyed, please like and subscribe. I would like to thank my channel members. Virginia, I saw you out there. Laurie, you're one of my patrons. You were out there. I don't know if you're still out there. Oh, Mary of Burgundy. Oh, yeah. Mary of Burgundy is mentioned here. Question. Where was Mary of Burgundy? Mary of Burgundy is mentioned here. She is the Lady of Burgundy. That is mentioned. She's at the high table with Margaret. Yep, she is mentioned. Yeah. So I would like to thank my patrons like Laurie and my channel members like Virginia for supporting me financially. If you would like to contribute to my work, patronage and channel membership both come with lots of extra perks, lots of extra access to extra footage, access to ad-free videos. I have a Discord server for Creative Contessa Discord server for my patrons and channel members, where I share lots of extra resources and where we chat and share ideas and really get our creative on together. So, yeah, if you are interested in supporting my work, know it comes with perks. Consider becoming a channel member or a patron. I'd like to thank all of you who leave super chats. Your generosity is noted. I would like to thank all of you who just participate and support me by commenting in the live stream, by hitting the thumbs up, by being subscribers, by leaving comments under videos when they post, and being part of my creative learning journey in general. I really appreciate you all. If you're watching this as a recording, or if you're watching this and you asked something and I didn't answer it, post the question in the comments and I promise I will see it and respond. Otherwise, later on today, my time, which might be in the middle of the night for many of you, I'm doing a travel buzz on my Travels with the Creative Contessa channel. If you want to follow me in my travel adventures, check that out. I'll be discussing the latest in travel news. There's been some salacious stuff happening lately, and also sharing some of my travel fails, which will hopefully allow your travels to go more easily because you'll learn from my mistakes. So, otherwise, until I see you all again, may your adventures, learning, and otherwise be creative. Good night, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Until next time.